So this video continues my review about how grades work within the Summit platform and how you can use the grade overview screen in order to track that. This time we're going to focus on content assessments. Now, again, from the progress screen or the week screen, if you click on the course name, it will open up the grades overview screen. And here you see a full breakdown of how the grades work. And that a smaller portion of the overall grade, in this case about 20%, comes from things that happen in content assessments, which are called focus area tests in the actual focus areas content assessments in the actual platform. Now, that is typical because 70 to 80% of the overall grade tends to come from skills. The priority is those skills. We've talked about this in other videos before. The actual content is just a backdrop to support that, but it does matter. So in the case of the power focus areas for this course, they account for 14% of the overall grade. And the student appears to have 100% on that, which means they get the total 14% added to their grade. Now, notice that even though that they have such a good content grade, they still have a C in the class because content isn't the key. Projects is what matters the most. In fact, if you hover over the grade, you can see what percentages of that grade is coming from each of those categories. Now, the projects being such a lower grade is what's causing the overall grade to be lower. And that's typical. The projects will usually make most of the difference. Now, if you click on Power Focus Area, it will actually, the tab would actually switch to the more information about why the student has 100% for that Power Focus Area. And you can actually see here that 3 focus areas have passed so far out of the 10 that we're going to have this year. That's what this is showing us. 13 weeks into the year, 31 left. And that indeed, Power Focus Areas account for 14% of the overall grade. It also tells you that in order to get the credit for the focus areas, you have to pass them. And that's actually interesting, and it explains the 100%, because what actually matters is not how well you do on them, but whether or not they have been completed in time. So there's a timeline that you can see very well through the year screen or here that shows how many you should have passed out of the total that are left for the year. And this student did do the 3 that have passed so far. And so the student is in good shape. Now, you can actually scroll down and see how that breaks down further. There, the student has passed indeed 3 of them, and you can see how many attempts it took for them to pass. And we really want to see students trying less than 6 times. This is a student that's struggling with the content assessments. It's typical now in the beginning of the year, but we work with them in mentoring and SDL time to try to give them the study skills to pick the right resources and study the right way so they attempt less. But they don't actually get hurt by attempting more than once. The problem isn't failing a test. The problem isn't not passing it in time. So as long as you pass the right number in time, you still have a good grade. You also can see the last time the tests were attempted or mastered if they were passed already. Now, 3 have been passed, 2 of them now with perfect scores. So even though the scores weren't perfect, that the student actually got 1 question wrong. By the way, if you hover over the actual results, you can see a breakdown by objective of how the student did on the test. So which objective the student is missing questions on. And that usually works as well for tests that assessments that have not been passed. And that helps the student realize what they should focus on. In fact, if you click on the actual focus area, it will take you to the focus area screen where you can see even more information about that. But we'll do that in a different video, so I'm not going to do that right now. It also can see here that because they've passed those 3, they have 100%. So you don't need to get a perfect score in the focus area to get full credit. You get credit fully for passing. Now, this is about 14% of their overall grade. So right now, each of these past tests is accounting for about 5% of their grade, a little less than that because it's 14 divided by 3. But as the year goes by and more focus areas become required, each focus area becomes a less and less of the overall grade. So by the end of the year here, since it's about 14% total, each of them is only going to account for like less than 2% of the student's overall grade. So what really matters is not each focus area's grade, but being on track, making sure that you passed as many as you need to have passed by now. Now, notice that the student also has attempted to pass 2 others, but that even though the student has not passed them, it has not hurt their grade. Because again, it's not the result of the test that matters. It's whether or not you passed or didn't pass that matters. Now, because the overall grades are worth less of the total, it's only about 20 to 30% of the overall grade, we make up for that by making a higher bar in order to pass. So 7 out of 10 isn't enough. Even though that's to be about 70% correct, which is a C, You need 8 out of 10 to get mastery of the assessment. But once you do, you get full credit for it. So it's like a trade-off. It is a higher bar, but you get full credit, and it's worth less of the overall total. So we de-emphasize the content, but make it a higher bar in order to get mastery of it. Now, this student's attempts that have not yet passed don't hurt their overall grade, but as soon as the student passes that before the next one gets overtaken on the year screen, they should be in good shape. And you can actually see by the year screen when that line is going to pass. In the bottom here, it also shows all the content assessments that have not been attempted yet. And that's okay. You don't need to attempt all of them. They have the whole year left still at this point. And so the student is fine to not have tried some of them, right? Because those are in the future. One more note about make about that actually is that there actually is no rule that you have to do these power focus areas in order. You can actually do them in whatever order you want. And I often encourage students to try to take the diagnostics for focus assessments to try to find one they might be better at and try to pass those first. However, it's also important to consider that each focus area kind of relates to a project. So if you actually hover over a focus area, you can actually see or go inside of it, you can actually see that kind of information. So you want to kind of do the focus areas that relate to the projects because the content, even though it's not the focus, it does help you do the project well because the project applies the concepts. So it's usually important to make sure you do decently well on the project in order to, with the information that you have in the power focus area. So I recommend that students do the focus areas in the order of the system as much as possible so that they can keep up with the content that they need for the projects. But they can, if they want to, do it in whatever order they want to. Now, additionals kind of work the same way. And this particular student has not taken any of the additionals yet. So because of that, they have 0 out of 6% on the additionals, and they are missing out on a big chunk of their grade. Now, additionals are worth so little that it's not causing their grade to hurt too much, but they could have a 79% right now, almost a B, if they had done the additionals. So I usually tell students, if you're struggling with the projects, is if you pass the additionals, it can kind of make up for it. So far, only one additional is expected. And again, they just have to pass it to get the credit, even if they just get the bare minimum. And so passing that one additional would make it almost them have a higher letter grade, right? So I tell my students that if you struggle with projects, the way to get a better grade may be in actually doing additionals or getting your content assessments to be higher. On the other hand, you might not need the content assessments to be high if your project grade is really good. So you can see that if I switch here to science, that because the student's science project grade is so high, this student would have a B no matter what, even if they had a really bad power focus area grade. But because they have completed power focus areas, they have a 94%, even though they have none of the additionals. So it's possible to get an A without the additionals, since it's worth less than 10% of the overall grade. So if you're doing really well in projects and the power focus areas, you might not need the additionals in order to be in a good place. In fact, even if I had didn't have full credit for the power focus area, I might still have an A in this class, or the student might, because they're doing so well in the projects. So that just comes to show you how important the projects actually are. In fact, you can't completely override the grade when the project grade is not very good. You can see that if I switch to the math grade, they have such a low math grade that even though the focus area grade is high and the portfolio problem grade is good, they still have a bad grade in the class because the focus area, the project grade or the unit grade in case of math is not that high. So the project is what matters the most, right? But you can try to balance those things out. I often tell students which are really close to the cusp, for a better letter grade, you could just do another additional or do better on the next project. You can play with what you focus on and play to your strengths in that sense, right? Now, remember, challenge focus areas do not show up here because they do not count for the student's grades. They're just additional material that the student can explore to go even deeper into content. One last thing I want to talk about before switching to some another view that you can see. I have some snapshots of how this all looks like at the end of the year, and I want to show you that, is that in the year screen, you can actually see really well which power focus areas have been passed versus not. Now, there's a difference between the power focus areas and the additionals in that in the additionals do not turn red. They don't turn red because they are additionals. It's possible to get an A without them. So even though they're overdue, they don't turn red. But any power focus area that has been overtaken by the line turns red. Now, additionals actually count against you, not even though they don't turn red, not when the line overtakes them, but as soon as the light touches them. So that's an update that happened in the system in the 2020 platform. So what actually happens is that as soon as the line hits the additional, so this one right here, well, this is a challenge one, but this one is an additional. The line is already over it. That is already counting against the student. Okay, so if the line, it's not when the line passes it the way it is with the power focus area. It's not going to turn red because additionals don't turn red, but it's already counting against the student. In other words, the student would need 2 right now to have perfect scores in the additionals. But again, that's only a small percentage of their overall grade. For power focus areas, it's only when the line overtakes it. So that's why this one isn't red, even though it's being touched, right? Because it's not yet due until the line passes it. So that's a slight little difference between the way the two are treated on the system. Last thing I want to do here is show you how this kind of all looks like at the end of the year. So here you see a student in both that's actually doing okay. Well, not more than okay. He's doing great at the end of the year. And a student that kind of struggled to pass content assessments. So this student has finished every single one of those power focus areas. And notice that even though you don't get perfect score in all of them, you still get full credit for them. So this student is getting all of the credit for the power focus areas that they need to get. So now also notice that in this course, this was actually worth 21% of their overall grade. So again, the content assessment can be anything from 20 to 30%, 10 to 20% of their overall grade, depending on the category. So in the year in the class. So this student did pretty well. Also notice this student also did not need that many attempts to pass them. They studied really hard and passed them on the first time. Now, this student struggled a little bit more, and even though they didn't have to try that many times to pass the ones they did, there are multiple ones towards the end of the year, and they still haven't passed them all. And so there's actually 2 the student hasn't even started with only 1 week of school left. And so that actually hurts their overall grade because they're missing power focus areas, and they're turned red on the system because they're behind the line, right? And it's not showing up red over here, but usually when they're behind the line, it will actually show up red, even if they're in the below mastery category. But the reason they're below mastery isn't because they're behind. It's because they attempted and did not pass it. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing unless the timeline has passed it, which is the case with this student. Let's see the same thing with math here. So you see a student who actually finished the year mostly really well. 1 power focus area did not finish, but this would actually put the student really high up on their overall grade. And this was worth about 14% of their overall grade. So the student would be really close to that, probably about 12% overall. And then this is a student who did not pass a lot of the power focus areas. It's towards the end of the year. More than likely, this student will have to do recovery after the school year is over due to this. Struggled a lot with math. Lots of focus areas that have not been passed. And that is why they count against the student, because the line is already past them. So that's kind of how it looks at the end of the year for a student that's actually really awesome, decent, or pretty good, and a student that's in trouble there. So I just wanted to give you an idea how that looks like. And that is, my friends, how the grade system works for power focus areas and additionals. Basically all the content assessments. And remember, this is the smaller portion of the overall student's grade. So the student's grade only is mostly coming from those projects. So remember that. But the assessments do matter too, especially because they support what you're doing in the projects. All right, we're going to do one more video to discuss what it means to be off track and what you can do to get out of that. So I'll see you guys then.